Thank you very much. Today's conference occurs at a time of great turmoil and great possibility. Today, the presidents of China, Russia, and the United States, among other nations, are convened in Europe. We don't know what will be discussed there, but we can say that in the struggle for mutual understanding among people and great nations, that the cultural dialogue among great nations should supersede temporary divisions of politics and ideology. The thinkers, Confucius and Gottfried Leibniz, are more alive today than the strong men and ideologues of the dim past of the East and West. Many years ago, back in 1984 to be exact, Helga Zepp-LaRouche founded our Schiller Institute with the strong conviction that all of humanity expresses greatness in specific ways through its various cultural gifts, and it is the universality as well as the ensemble of that greatness that distinguishes us as a species. That there is a destiny for our species, a divine destiny, if you will, that allows us to transcend the apparent differences to arrive at a world finally fit for adults. Interestingly, the nation of China is leading the way in the world today in the effort to raise people, the human race, out of poverty and out of hunger. Our conference today should be seen in the context of the global discussion, the global dialogue, which the presidents of our respective nations can be productively engaged in. I'd like to point out that when we talk about the actual topic, food for peace and thought, China-US agricultural cooperation, of course, this extends to all other nations. One element of this I'd like to point out to you is that 50 years from now, in 2067, the most populated continent in the world will be Africa. In about 32 years or so, there will be 1 billion young people under the age of 18 in the continent of Africa. Approximately 50 years from now, there will be 1 billion people living in the nation of Nigeria. China's approach to resolving not only its own food crises, but in lifting people out of poverty as a whole, is one which we used to call or know in the United States as the American approach. We used to do things like that in this country, and we are capable of doing these things again. American agriculture demonstrates that capability. I want to hold up just for a moment these two reports, which I neglected to bring to the podium when I came. The New Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge, which was the inspiration of Helga Zepp-LaRouche, actually the second edition of a report that was originally written in 1997, 20 years ago, which was called the Eurasian Land Bridge, the New Silk Road Locomotive for World Economic Development. And this is the Belt and Road monograph. This is actually an older copy of the China Energy Fund Committee. And we saw in these documents and in the recent period of months that we've been privileged to collaborate with that organization, a need to convene, even right after the American 4th of July, a conference to have this discussion. We're pleased today to start us off with that discussion, to have with us Mr. Dwayne Hopkins, former mayor of Muscatine, Iowa. I think he's intending to become mayor of that again. And he is someone with a unique story about Russia-Chinese cooperation. And so I'd like Mr. Hopkins to come to the stage now to start us off.
Good morning. Ni hao. In 1985, 1 year after the Institute was founded, we had 4 visitors to Muscatine, 4 individuals that had never been in the continental United States before. This was a small delegation that came to Muscatine through the Sister States organization to learn a little bit about agriculture, or as much as you can in 3 days. Well, this delegation was led by a young provincial gentleman by the name of Xi Jinping. And it was also co-led by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Bai. Mr. Bai is a retired provincial official and is now a professional photographer. But in any case, the point is, these gentlemen came to Muscatine with realistically no preconceived notions about what they were going to face and who they were going to face and what they were going to learn. So on day number 1, and they homestayed, by the way, Xi Jinping stayed with the Dvorak family. And for breakfast, 2 eggs, hash browns, sausage, or bacon. And he looked at that breakfast plate and wondered, what am I to do with that? Obviously, he'd never seen anything like that before, but if you're from the great Midwest, you understand that's who we are and that's what we do. Well, as the 3 days progressed, an occasional barbecue took place, an occasional boat ride on the Mississippi River. By the way, Muscatine is on the banks of the Mississippi River, as well as being in the heartland of the United States. So these gentlemen took in all of these things, a barbecue out on the farm, a boat ride on the Mississippi River, and many, many other things and stories that I could share with you, but time will not permit that. In any case, at the end of their stay, they all departed and went back to their homeland in China. Now comes the important part. 27 years later, this young man is the vice president of the People's Republic of China. And having a conversation in China with our then governor, Terry Branstad, he simply posed the question to Governor Branstad, how are my friends Sarah and Roger Landy? Well, these are 2 people that were very instrumental in arranging for this delegation to be in Muscatine in 1985. The point being, it's phenomenal that this individual would remember those 2 names, as well as the Dvorak family, and others as a part of their host groups. So Xi Jinping immediately arranged for a revisit, 27 years later, a revisit to the United States, and more specifically to Muscatine, Iowa. And I can't believe I'm saying Muscatine, Iowa, and I'm in the heart of New York City. It's kind of unbelievable for me, even a past mayor. But I'm very proud to do that. In any case, Xi Jinping, being the vice president, made arrangements for his airplane to stop off in Moline, Illinois, and he carpooled to Muscatine and met with old friends, myself included, for about an hour and a half before he had to depart for Des Moines and then to California. But the point is, we all have gifts. And I don't care if you're from South Dakota or California or Texas, or you're from the great state of New York. You have something to offer, not just international visitors, but visitors in general. And that simply is being a neighbor. We seem to be in Muscatine well known for the way that we treated our Chinese friends. we didn't treat them any different than we would our neighbor. We invited them for breakfast. We invited them out on the farm for a barbecue. We invited them for a boat ride on the Mississippi River. So I say to you today in this conference, be yourself. Be your neighborly self. And that's the simple truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hopkins. To respond to the mayor, we have someone who is an old friend to some of us, older to others. And he has been responsible for much of the dialogue that we've been involved in the last several months. This is Dr. Patrick Ho, Deputy Chairman and Secretary General, China Energy Fund Committee, Hong Kong, China.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you early in the morning on Friday. And very delightful to meet the Prime Mayor of Muscatine and listen to all the old stories. And indeed, President Xi Jinping and agriculture had a long relationship, and they have come a long way in leading China out of famine, out of poverty. My topic is food for peace and thought. Firstly, I would like to share with you the interesting connection between China's President Xi Jinping and agriculture. In 1969, he was 15 years old when he went to Liangjiahe, a small village in northwest China's Shanxi province, as part of the Down to the Countryside movement. He spent 7 years there as village party secretary, leading villages and accomplishing practical and pioneering work like building methane pool, erecting dams, and liberating the workforce. Then in 1974, becoming village party secretary, the first thing President Xi then undertook was to harness local biogas resources, a biofuel generated through biological breakdown of organic matter, mainly human and animal feces, which is the grassroots technical know-how since the time of Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao using biogas in 1954 and 56, okay, for delivering basic energy to the families in rural China. He learned how to build such biogas digester when he was on the research and study tour to Mianyang, Sichuan province. When Xi returned to Liangjiahe village in Shanxi and built the first biogas digester in the village and even in Shanxi province. Then in 1993, Xi visited Liangjiahe village again, where he has helped building the first biogas digester and introduced biomass energy too. From 1975 to 1979, Xi studied chemical engineering in Tsinghua University in Beijing as a worker, peasant, and soldier, taking on three identities. But from 1983 to 85, Xi was appointed deputy party secretary and later secretary of rural Zhenglin County, which is really a farming community in Hebei province. Then, as you listen to Mr. Mayor Hopkins, 1985, the 31-year-old Xi Jinping led Hebei animal feed delegation to Muscatine, Iowa, where he learned about hog farming and corn application and toured farms, factories, universities, research institutes, and government agencies for 2 weeks. Then, in 2012, the then Chinese Vice President Xi Jinping returned to Muscatine of Iowa to visit his old friend, just as you heard before. And in 2013, President Xi Jinping, in his Central Rural Work Conference, said, quote, "When defining a moderately prosperous society, the key is to observe the conditions of our farmers. It must be noted that agriculture is still the weakest link among our four pursuits of industrialization, informatization, urbanization, agricultural modernization. The countryside still lags behind. If China wants to be strong, agriculture must be strong. If China wants to be beautiful, the countryside must be beautiful. If China wants to get rich, the farmers must get rich. And these are the three farming principles that we have in China today. In China, feeding its multitude of people has always been the government's top priority and concern from dynasty to dynasty throughout its history. In modern China, for instance, since 1994, agriculture, rural communities, and farmers-related issues and policies have been traditionally highlighted in China's #1 central document, announced by the State Council on January 1st of every year for 14 years in a row. It just reflects what type of importance our government is attached to agricultural policies. China pledges to deepen rural reforms and step up agricultural modernization to feed 1.3 billion people, and which has always been a daunting task because topsoil quality and fertility of arable soil have declined significantly due to thousands of years of continuous cultivation in the past and the indiscriminate use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides in recent years. Extreme weather and climate changes have hastened the desertification of farmland, but the most devastating influence threatening the ever-diminishing amount of arable land came from the rapid development of cities. Industrialization and urbanization have been usurping arable land for the sake of modern development. Sustainable agriculture has become relatively difficult for China. But today, China has to feed 22% of the world's population, with only around 7% of the world's arable land. China's per capita arable land is less than 0.1 hectare, which is less than half of the world's average, which is 0.2 hectares per person, and far behind the level of 0.49 hectares in the United States. To have less land to feed more people. With continuous efforts and dedication, the overall situation of malnutrition and hunger is improving. China reduced the level of undernourishment in the country from almost 24% in 1990 to 9.3% in 2016. China alone accounts for almost 2/3 of the total reduction in the number of undernourishment in developing countries since 1990. And China has successfully lifted 700 million people out of poverty through more than 30 years of reform and opening up. But no man is an island. While China has produced barely enough to feed its lot, it has been providing continuous support through the World Food Program to reducing poverty and hunger in developing countries around the world. In March 2016, the Chinese government and WFP signed a memorandum of understanding to pave the way for other developing countries to draw on China's own experience on reducing poverty and hunger. And China has made great efforts on poverty and hunger alleviation and has been exemplary for others. Even so, the elephant in the room today is, can the world provide enough food for an ever-growing population? The challenges have been with these questions for not only decades, but centuries. Ever since Thomas Matthews from 2 centuries ago, and he proposed that the 2 things for the world going forward is unsustainable. The whole thing for the world going forward is unsustainable because 20 years from then, that means year 1766, the population will outgrow the amount of food and natural resources that the world could provide. So he is painting a very miserable picture for everybody. Then decades later comes the Club of Rome, and they put up a very famous and their first ever research paper, summarized as, quote, the combination of population growth and finite resources will eventually result in mass misery. They went through all subtle analyses and different resources available to mankind, coming up with the conclusion that the world is going to sink. But their projections were based on what they could predict at the time and totally ignorant of the disruptive technologies yet to come. But fortunately, we have somebody like Julian Simon, who said in 1981, quote, increasing wealth and technology make more resources available. Old resources are recycled and new alternatives are assumed to be developed by the market. The ultimate resource was human intelligence. Human intelligence can really turn things around and we are relying on human intelligence today to leapfrog developments and to provide for the future lots. This is what comes out of the Food and Agriculture Organization. For the world as a whole, per capita food availability has risen from about 2,600 kilocalories per person per day in 1990 to over 2,800 kilocalories per person per day in 2011. And how much do we need for us to survive? 2,000 calories per day, could be healthy and to live very well. And the world can produce much more than we need. So the world actually produces more than 1.5 times enough food to feed everyone on the planet as of 2011. So what's the problem? We have produced more food than what we need. So what's the problem? But when we look around, we still see nearly 800 million people, or 1 in 9, that are hungry, malnourished, and wanting, mostly due to poverty and unequal distribution. And 780 million people of these hungry people live in developing countries, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, which has the highest prevalence of undernourishment. So what's happening? Why do people still go hungry when we're producing so much? First, the world has inadequate arable land, and they are dwindling in size and amount. We do not have enough land to grow things to feed people. And poorer qualities of land, many of these lands turning salt alkalization and desertification and desertification. But most threats are coming from industrialization and urbanization. And you can see there's a kink on this curve, okay? And it happened in 1991 and 92, and that's when the former Soviet Union began reporting statistics to the World Bank. So the total amount increased in a higher point, lifting the whole curve from 1992. Another problem is food waste and lost. Roughly 1/4 of the calories and 1/3 of the mass of the world's food crops are being wasted. This waste happens in each phase of our food's journey, from farm to fork or trash bin. Let's look at the graph here. The food loss happens in production, in handling and storage, in distribution and marketing. But the most important one is consumption. It's on your table. Over 700 calories is being wasted. About 1/4 or 1/3 of our food are being wasted and lost. The World Health Organization estimated that the world wastes enough calories to feed 1.9 billion more people for a healthy and satisfied diet. 1/4 of the food waste was from our dining table. Human behavior and food consumption is unsustainable. It's not the process of agriculture that's unsustainable. It's human behavior that's unsustainable. The third reason is non-resilient production and climate changes, with increasing drought, flooding, and changing climate patterns, making agriculture and management even further complicated and harvest very unpredictable. But more importantly, it is poverty. It's a vicious cycle. People do not have food to eat because they are poor, and the poor get poorer and weaker and weaker, so they cannot find jobs to provide for themselves. As of 2016, the World Bank has estimated that there were 896 million poor people in developing countries who lived on less than $1.9 per day. The people making less than this $1.9 a day, and most of whom are resource-poor farmers cultivating unviable small plots of land, cannot afford to buy this food. So what do? We have to feed the currently almost 800 million hungry people, plus the additional 2 billion people by 2015. So by 2050, we have to feed a total of 2.8 billion people worldwide, in addition to what we have right now, which means we should increase the crop production by 60 to 100%. And these are the predicaments we're facing today. Well, what can we do? We can grow more crops. We can address at least part of the problem by growing more crops. With technologies, we can increase the efficiency of crop growing, but this approach may cause soil fatigue and won't be ecologically feasible. And secondly, it's food waste. Now, this is something we can do about, which is most important and something to which all of us can contribute. Through streamlined management for food production using technologies to improve logistics so that we don't waste. And third, we change the diet pattern but most importantly, is sustainable, frugal lifestyle that stresses no wastage on the table. The spirit of sustainability calls for self-control and refrainment against excess and indulgence. It reminds us not to waste and to use the earth's resources sparingly, wisely, and responsibly. Our consumption should cater for what we need rather than what we want and desire. For desires can be insatiable and have no limits. It warns against greed and calls for moderation. And it is something that the Chinese traditional Taoist culture can contribute about. Thirdly, we can build salient agricultural infrastructure to address the inclement weather and climate change. And lastly, we can develop more arable lands with new technologies such as improving irrigation system, crop rotations, and you will hear from Mr. Lan, oat cultivation. It will create more arable land. So we have to prepare and start saving for rainy days. How do we do that? We should adopt a sustainable lifestyle of food consumption. We should better use the crops we already grow, changing our diets to depend less on rich foods and curbing food waste can reduce global demand for food. Especially shifting just 20% of the anticipated future global consumption of beef to other meat, fish, or dietary could spare hundreds of millions of hectares of forests and savannas. Lastly, cutting the rate of food waste in half could close the food gap by about 20% by 2050. Indeed, the principle of sustainability should be incorporated into our daily lives and manifested by our every deed. The ancient Chinese culture had provided the Chinese the spiritual narrative of frugal living. Ending hunger and poverty in a sustainable way is morally right, politically beneficial, and economically feasible. Inaction is no longer an option, so we must be prepared and start saving. The common denominator is respect. Respect of our fellow man's needs, respect of nature's needs, respect of future generation needs, and respect of man's own spiritual need. But the greatest respect is to respect food itself. We have taken it for granted for ages and generations, and we have to treat food with respect. We believe in a sustainable lifestyle, and we also believe first and foremost that accessibility to food is the most basic of human rights. And that's why our President Xi Jinping, wanted to share this dictum with our neighbors and the rest of the world through the Belt and Road Initiative. For example, consider what happened in the Middle East and North Africa, acronym MENA region. For a long time, agriculture had been the foundation of economies of most of countries in the MENA region, despite the fact that MENA is the most water scarce and dry region in the world. Many countries in this region, especially those around the Mediterranean Sea, are highly dependent on agriculture. The contribution of agricultural sector to the overall economy varies significantly among countries in this region, ranging, for example, from 3.2% in Saudi Arabia to over 13% in Egypt. Towards the end of the 19th century, unfortunately, the discovery of oil in Middle East and North African region had attracted foreign and international interest in the forms of investment, imperialism, colonialism, exploitation, and upsetting confusions with political and economic displacement of the indigenous agrarian lifestyle and frivolous abuse of the land and its people. Thus, agricultural development and stable food supply became a serious issue and one of the biggest challenges facing the MENA region. The food gap for the region has been increasing and widening in recent years. Rising food and oil prices and the adverse climatic condition have further aggravated the food situation for the region amidst political turmoils. Take Syria, for example. The past few years of wars have had disastrous effect on the maintenance of irrigation systems and infrastructure, and they have displaced farming populations, disrupted trade, and caused untold damages to the ecology. The conflict in Syria and the rise of ISIS have displaced half a nation of people and generated the largest humanitarian crisis in the world today. Some 8.7 million people are still suffering from food security, and approximately 80% of people now face poverty, with 1 in 3 people unable to have afford basic food. In a good year, Syria produced 4 million tons of wheat, but in 2015, they produced less than 500,000 tons, and the price of wheat increased many times. This tragic impact was not only restricted to Syria, but as more than 4 million refugees have flooded out into neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, and so on and so forth. War and drought are now slowly erasing the part of MENA region, leaving scars behind that will probably never heal. Village, towns, and entire farming regions are being depopulated by violence, social breakdown, economic collapse. For every field abandoned, pump engine stolen, water pipes shot and arrested, and farming family forced to flee. The future seems to become yet a little darker. Excuse me, I need a few more minutes because I think this is a really important message for everybody. Okay. The MENA countries have been trampled, torn with warfare and incessant social discord, when the entire Western world was fighting to get their hands on the oil beneath their soil. The world conflict intensity map clearly showed that the MENA is one of the most dangerous regions in the world with intensive conflicts. Today, many countries in the MENA region were dilapidated, ruined, with the foundation of the economy destroyed. Farmers were left with barren lands that had been pillaged and bombed and produced nothing edible or tradable. The local agricultural system in the region was catastrophically damaged beyond salvation. The unstable politics, dwindling economy, and disrupted communities left many locals, and especially young people, homeless, jobless, helpless, in an utter despair. Those who have been left behind in desperation and hopelessness, finding no recourse to address systemic unfairness within the system, resort to extreme measures to make their voices heard. As a result, the subsequent furious rise of radicalization and violent extremism in MENA region started to trigger endless cultural and religious conflicts and deadly attacks throughout the world, threatening peace and everybody's safety. Some may bring combating global terrorism to the stage with regard to military suppression as a direct, effective approach to solve extreme problems here. Unfortunately, the reality seems to go into the reverse scenario. The global terrorist database showed that from 2001 to 2004, about 1,400 global terrorist attacks happen every year, resulting in an average total death of 5,000 people. But 10 years later, between 2012 and 2015, the number of yearly global terrorist attacks is increased to over 13,000, with an average annual total death toll of 29,000 people. This means that after 10 years of stepped-up global anti-terrorist efforts, the annual number of terrorist attacks increased by over 8 times, and the annual death toll increased more than 4-fold. And it seems that our world has fallen into an awkward dilemma, that more efforts we put in anti-terrorism cause even more fear and more deaths. Perhaps we have been addressing only the symptoms without attending the roots of the problem. The political problem in the MENA region cannot be solved by military might alone. Only by changing the underlying socio-economic conditions in those regions can we provide hope and a future for the great mass of young people who today are living in despair and resorting to desperate measures by joining ISIL or Al-Qaeda or similar formations. And today's China's Belt and Road Initiative runs through the continents of MENA, linking up countries with rich resources and huge potentials across vast regions that enjoy advantages and complementarities in agricultural resources, technologies, productivities, and markets. And it stands ready to help. As we can see, agriculture plays an important role in the national economy of these barren road countries, and agricultural cooperation is the common pursuit, since we all want to fight hunger, eradicate poverty, and achieve food and nutritional security. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, by introducing and rebuilding agricultural infrastructure projects and reliable agricultural trade and partnerships, maybe these countries will catch a ray of light for their future and reinstate peace, hope, and long-lasting stability. Ladies and gentlemen, may I take this opportunity to introduce the Middle East Reconstruction Initiative. Acronym is MERCY to all of you. The purpose of MERCY is to identify ways to integrate the reconstruction of the Middle East into a framework of the Belt and Road Initiative, to discuss the role of international community, multilateral development bank, and private sector in the reconstruction effort, and to draw attention to the need to reach political and economic solution to the region's challenges. The agricultural sector is the most pertinent starting point to advance this initiative. The MENA region as an essential pivotal connecting the East and the West economic circle of BRI is an important link in China's Belt and Road Initiative. For instance, I won't skip the Israeli the examples. Let's skip to the MERCY and MENA region can work together with China to reinstate farming infrastructure by reforming farmlands, improving topsoil, and modernizing irrigation system. Next is enhance connectivity by building roads and transportation system to distribution hubs and to the markets. Such should be followed by instigating systems of social infrastructures, such as land division, provision of securities and welfare to the farmers, and the financial systems to attract investments. Further exchanges in modern agricultural technologies and know-how will contribute to agricultural productivity, food security, and finally improving the country's overall economic development. Agricultural cooperation will bring peace, hope, and a future to the people there, and offering harmony and absolution to the rest of the world. I think absolution is required. Reconstruction, beginning with agricultural system in the MENA, help to restore the cultural values of agricultural-based society, so that the younger generation can understand the value of being connected to the land and value peace in the country, something that we Chinese know only too well. Chinese farmers have always been peace-loving, gregarious, defending collective interests, and mindful of their own businesses and not others. Agricultural cooperation effectuated through the BRI will also introduce Chinese agrarian values to MENA region to temper the confusion imparted by bellicose zealotry and extremism. Finishing. Such collaboration helped local farmers to achieve independence. Agriculture is not only important for promoting sustainable livelihood by ensuring food and nutritional security, it's also crucially important to preserving natural resources and biodiversity. China is a developing nation with a largely agricultural-based culture and society. Being agricultural, we uphold the spirit of harmony. We treat others with love, respect, kindness, and generosity. We strive for peace and prosperity for all mankind. By embarking on this BRI together, sharing agrarian values which center around peace and harmony, we can make the world a brighter place for all of us and our children, for now and in the future. Agricultural cooperation under the BRI and MERCY revives the values of this agricultural-based culture, helping countries along the BRI to cope with a wide range of social and political problems, and hence fostering harmonious societies. As we share food security, we also share agricultural know-how, and we share agrarian cultural values, and we share peace. We're inviting the countries and peoples all over the world to share a vision, a commitment, a common destiny, and a dream. It is a dream of peace under heaven and the world as one. And this dream belongs to you and to me. I'm sorry I went way over time, but I think this is a very important message that I should deliver to all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Let me say to everybody, and including to some of the other speakers, as you know, we have time constraints, and we had a technical problem earlier, so we ate up some of the early extra time we gave. I think that some of us here are very aware of the idea of the collective, right? A single effort on the part of everybody to make sure that a single effect is achieved. And I think if people can, as best you can, stay within the limits, it will help us immensely, because there's much that we have to get through this morning, and you'll see the character of it. We're going to go now to a video prepared for the conference. And let me, by the way, let people know that Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is not here, is hooked up via Google Hangout. She is watching the entire proceedings, and she usefully corrected me on one thing that I failed to point out, which is that the very first actual report that we did on the question of what was called the Eurasian Land Bridge, which was the original idea of our conception of the Silk Road and the extended World Land Bridge, was actually in 1991. This is a result of a conversation that Helga and Lyndon LaRouche had in 1989. Lyndon LaRouche at that time, let me say, the economist, was actually imprisoned at that time in the United States. And he formulated that conception, which was called the Eurasian Land Bridge, out of his head the day after the Berlin Wall came down. It's a sort of a legendary story among those of us who are familiar with and work with Lyndon LaRouche. I just wanted to make sure I indicated that here because it's an important correction. So we are going to now roll the video.
Dear conference participants, I feel very honored to be able to address you, even if it is by video, because I think we are all aware that we are involved in the historically extremely important process of trying to improve the relationship between the United States and China in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. This is especially important in the area of agriculture and food production, because this is an extremely urgent question. Because while at the G20 meeting in Hangzhou last year, China and all the other participating nations devoted themselves to eradicate poverty until the year 2020, we have not yet reached that goal. Just a couple of days ago, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization put out a report that world hunger is on the rise, and that the situation, especially in Yemen, is terrible. Half or more of the population is in an acute danger of starvation, but also in Nigeria, in South Sudan, and many other areas, the situation is worsening. Well, today there's also the G20 summit in Hamburg, and the outcome will be a surprise either way, because unlike last year's G20 in Hangzhou, which was very harmonious and characterized by a great optimism for the future of mankind, this time the tensions are very high. In the last couple of days, however, there was sort of a prelude in the form of a summit between President Putin and President Xi Jinping in Moscow, which was really extremely important, and both characterized it as the most important event of the year for their nation. They deepened the strategic partnership, they established an even deeper level of their personal friendship, and they declared that the time of an unipolar world is over because of this strategic partnership especially. This is certainly true that the time of an unipolar world is over, but multipolarity is still not the solution, because it implies still geopolitics, which was the cause of 2 world wars in the 20th century. And this geopolitics is still working in North Korea, in Syria, in Ukraine. We must therefore find a higher level. We must get the world to what President Xi Jinping always calls a community for a shared future of humanity. Now, one big step in that direction could be the meeting between President Trump and President Putin, who are meeting today for the first time in the form of as presidents. Now, obviously, this is a very important step, because between President Trump and President Xi Jinping, a very positive relationship has been established already. So whatever comes out of this Trump-Putin meeting is very, very crucial. because the questions we have to solve are urgent and dramatic. The food crisis, the hunger crisis, which I mentioned, is only a symptom of the fact that the old economic model is not functioning anymore. We are sitting on a powder keg that the crisis which erupted in 2008 could come back with a vengeance, only much, much worse. Because even a slight increase in the interest rate, moving away from quantitative easing, could lead to a blowout of the corporate debt. Now, the firms which got the zero interest rate liquidity from the central banks, the quantitative easing, use this money not to invest in productive investment, but for so-called financial engineering by buying up their own stocks to make it look better in the books, having more nominal value, but also increasing the corporate debt, which now could blow out if there is an increase in the interest rate. And that is only one aspect of the systemic crisis which we still have. The other one is the so-called level 3 derivatives, which many European and other banks are sitting on. Level 3 derivatives are those who have no market price because you can sell them, and the banks still keep them as assets, which really is a sort of a mega fraud. So the problem is that just yesterday, the fourth largest bank in Italy was taken over by the government and combined with a bail-in whereby the customers could only sell their bonds and stocks with 18 cents to the euro. And that is a threat which is hanging over the entire banking system. Now, what could be done to solve that? Well, let's look at one other aspect of the crisis. Just a couple of days ago, in one single day, 80,000 refugees arrived from Libya in little boats being picked up by NGOs in Italy. 80,000 people in one day overstretches the capacity of any country, and Italy has already taken so many million people. So when they requested that other countries located at the Mediterranean, like Spain and France, should also take some of these refugees, these countries rejected that. Now that obviously shows there is no unity in the European Union on this question. Now, how could you address this whole series of problems? What should actually be on the agenda of the G20 in Hamburg? Well, if you would put a global Glass-Steagall separation on the agenda, doing exactly what Franklin D. Roosevelt did in 1933 by separating the commercial banks and the investment banks, putting the commercial banks under state protection, writing off the non-performing derivatives of the investment banks, and then go to a Hamiltonian credit system by setting up national banks in every country and issuing large-scale, low-interest rate credits, then you could solve the problem. Now, Mr. LaRouche has defined 4 laws to remedy the financial crisis, and the 4th law is a crash program in the realization of thermonuclear fusion power. And there, the good news is that China just accomplished a major breakthrough in this respect with its tokamak in Hefei, where they reached a steady state, so-called steady state H mode option for 101.2 seconds. This is a major step towards the realization of thermonuclear fusion. Now, if such a reorganization, according to these 4 laws, Glass-Steagall, National Bank, Credit System, Crash Program for Fusion and Space Technology would be implemented, then the transatlantic countries could cooperate with such banks as the AIIB, the New Development Bank, and others together with China, and build up, for example, Africa. Now, China was so far the only country which has done something to fight the root causes of the refugee crisis by investing large scale in rail lines in Africa, in dams, in power plants, in industrial parks, in agriculture. And this is actually the only way to solve the refugee crisis in a human way. Now, one promising step in this right direction is that between President Xi Jinping and Chancellor Merkel, yesterday they agreed that they will build together on a hydropower complex in Angola, and stated that that could be a model for the cooperation between China and Germany in Africa in general. Now, the Africans have, because of what China has been doing in building up huge industrial complexes for the first time in Africa, they have a new sense of self-confidence, and they are telling the Europeans, we don't want to have your sermons how we should have good governance. We want to have investments in infrastructure, in manufacture, in agriculture as equal business partners. Now, can we expect the G20 to do this, to go in this direction of a global reorganization of the financial system and then go for a real intervention in development of Africa? Well, I'm afraid they will not. But this will remain the issue which has to be accomplished. The 4 laws of Linden-LaRouche, and to get the United States and European countries to cooperate with China in the Belt and Road Initiative, in the new Silk Road, is indeed the approach how you can tackle all problems in the world. Now, this conference, the Food for Peace conference, is a very important step in this direction. As a matter of fact, to get the United States and China to work together on a new Silk Road perspective, in the new Silk Road spirit, is, in my view, the most important aspect in this process. Because if the 2 largest economies can work together, I think we are on the right way to win for all of civilization. Therefore, let's work together to join the Chinese dream and revive the American dream, because the American dream needs to be revived because it has almost been forgotten. But together we can accomplish the dream for all of humanity.
So just to give the order of the next 4 speakers, it will be, first we'll begin with Mr. Lan Huasheng, who I would ask to come to the stage now, and then Professor Carl Prey, then Mr. Wei Zhenglin, and then Robert Baker. So while Mr. Lan, or is he here? While he's coming to the stage, let me just announce that there will be a press availability at 1 p.m., and that will be upstairs. You'll be able to see us there, and there may be a few other matters that we can discuss at that point, and we will still be able, it looks like, to have approximately a 45-minute discussion period, assuming we're able to stay on schedule from here. So, Mr. Lan? Very good.
尊敬的各位女士们、先生们，大家早上好。
Good morning.
非常高兴能够与大家一起围绕着“民以食为天”这么一个主题来一起探讨这个农业的可持续发展。在中国，农业受到了政府的高度的重视，被称为国之根本，是国家这个关系国际营生的大事。当然，更是与我们每个人的生活息息相关。农业企业是农业产业化经营的龙头和主体，在农业发展中地位非常重要，作用非常关键。在产业发展的同时，要承担起更多的社会责任。从创立大成农业的那一天起，我们就确认了企业的经营原则，那就是要坚守农业安全和食品安全的这么一个底线，坚守农业人道法治国，敬畏自然的本心初心。
the Tao of
道
that
就是规律，
of the
生
imitation
就
of
是生生
nature
不息
and the
这
reverence of
其实
nature.
也就是我们
Da,
大
which is
生
the
农业
first
这个
character in the
名字
name
的
of
来
our
源
company,
和这个
means
我们
Tao,
对
and
于
Tao is the
从事农业的
law.
一个
And
思
the
考。
second character, Shen, means the circle of life.
如果用一句话来讲，就是要
To put
发
it
展和谐
simply,
农
we
业、
have to
健
develop
康农业
agriculture in a
和安
harmonious,
全农业。
healthy, and safe manner.
下面呢，我分3个方面呢，给大
My
家做
presentation
一
is
些
divided
我的思
into
考。第一
3
个是发
parts.
展和谐农业。
First,
中国社会历
harmonious
来倡导
agricultural
天人合
development.
一，
In
主
China, we
张
always
人与自
advocate
然、
the harmony
社
between
会
heaven
和
and the
生态的和谐
human
统一。
beings. We
农
advocate
业
the
原本是人类生
harmonious
存环境的一
unification
部
between
分，
man and nature, and between
是
social and
大自然对
ecological
人类的
development.
慷慨的馈
Agriculture
赠
is。part of the
但
human
随着现代
existence.
化
It's a
农业的
very
发展，
generous
农业对于
bequest
自然
from
环境的破
nature to
坏，
the humanity.
对周
However,
边
with
资
the
源的浪
development
费
of modern
就日益严重，
agriculture,
影响到了整
agriculture
体
is
生态
wreaking
的平衡
havoc
发
in a
展。
natural environment, leading to
未来的农业发展
increasingly
绝不
severe
能再以
waste
牺牲环
of
境为代价。
resources.
企业在组织
Future
农业
development
产业
of
发展上，
agriculture should
必须要
not
以
be
周边生
conducted
态
at
相
the
协调，
expense of
利益
environment
生
anymore.
态
The
和环
development
境
of
的保护。
agribusiness and other
大生
industries
农业
should be
2016
in
年年底
coordination
收购
with
了一家农
neighboring
药生产企业，
ecological
就是
systems
我们
and
在
serve
安
the
徽省
purpose
的
of
华兴化工，
ecological and
是一家
environmental
中国
protection.
农药
In
重点骨干企
2016,
业，
Dasheng
曾经也
Agriculture
是中国 A
acquired
股
a
的一个上市
pesticide
公司。
company in
在中国
Anhui
政府高
province.
度
It
重
was
视
a
并
listed
全
company
面
in
开
China.
展环境保护工作
However,
的情
due
况下，
to the
企业因废气、
emission
废
of
水的排放问
waste
题，
gas
面
and
临着
discharge of
关门停产
wastewater,
的危险。
it was facing the risk of
在我们
being
这
shut down.
个思考收购这家企业的同时，我们为了彻底
In
的
order
解决环保
to
问题，不
effectively
对周边
resolve
的
the
环
issue
境
of
造成破坏，
environmental
我
protection
们和
and
公司
stop
管理
polluting the
团队
neighboring
一
environment,
同
we
进
worked
行努
with the
力，
management
进
team
行
of
研
that
究
company
思考。
to
整
think
个呢，我
about
们
this issue,
投
and
入了
we
1亿多的人民
invested
币，进行
100 million
了技术
RMB
改造
yuan
升
in
级
technological
和环境的治
innovation
理，
and
取得了非
upgrading
常
and
好的成效。
environmental governance,
这个
and
废
we
水
have
处理
achieved
技
great
术呢，
results.
受到
The
进一
technology
步的提
of
升，并借
waste
助于专业
gas
团
and
队的力
wastewater
量，加
treatment
快研究
reached a new
对
standard,
固
and
体
we
废
are
物
also
的
stepping
处理
efforts right
办
now
法，
to
减少
improve
对
the
环境污染
research
和破坏。
into
我们这个
waste
企业
gas
呢，
and
在中国
wastewater
应该说是
treatment
有非常长
technology.
的历史，是一个非常好的一个企业。
This
但
is a
是因
very
为
good company
环
with
境
a
的
long
影响，
history in
在
China.
之前
However,
呢，
due
这
to its
个受到了
impact
政
on
府
the
的这个
environment,
非常高强度的管制，
it was
所以去年前
heavily
年
regulated by the
在这
Chinese
2-3年
government.
时间里面呢，都是没有一个非常好的这个
In
生
the
产。
past
所以
2 or
呢，我
3
们从去
years,
年的这个11月份收
it
购以来，
stopped
到现在呢，我们
its
花了这个将
production
近半年的时
since
间，
our
对这个
acquisition
环境呢
of
做了非
the
常好的一个
company.
改善。
In the second half of last year, we spent
目前
over half a
我们也
year
正谋划企业向生物
reforming
农药
the
企业转
company,
型发
and
展，
we have
这既
achieved
是
great
对周边
results.
环境和居民的负责，也是对企业
We
员
have
工
to be
健康的
responsible
负责，
to the
更是对健康农
neighboring
业的追
environment
求。
and its inhabitants,
另外，
and we have
在
to be
中国的吉
responsible
林
to the health of
白城市，我们
the
投资发展燕麦
corporate
产业，
employees.
燕麦
In
耐
Meixu
盐
City
碱
of
能力
Jilin
强，
province,
可
we
吸收盐
invested
碱地中的
in
盐分，
the
在改
development
良
of
废
oat
化、耕
industry.
地和草原，
Oats
改善生
have
态环境等方
very
面，具
strong
有得
saline
天
and
独厚的这
alkali
么一个非
tolerant
常好的环境优势，
capabilities,
可以
and
达到
they
生物
can
修复盐
absorb
碱化
the
的非常好的一
salinary
个
elements
效果。
in the
白城基地周边2000多万亩
saline
的
and
盐碱化
alkali
的
soil.
土地，适宜呢种植这个燕麦。
The over
然后据统计，
20
在不
million
包括
more
滨海
of
滩涂的前提下，
saline
中
and
国
alkali
盐碱
soil
化面
in the
积大概在
neighboring
5亿亩
areas
左
of
右，
Baicheng is
其中
conducive to the
可以开
cultivation
发
of
利用
oat.
面积大概2亿亩左右。
We
而这
have
些盐碱
over
地在中
200
国政
million
府
more
严
of
格
land
控
in this
制的
area
18
that
亿
is
亩耕地红线之外，
favorable for the
我们利
cultivation
用
of
科技和
oats.
科技的力
We
量
use
推动发展
science
燕
and
麦产业，
technology
建
to
立
promote the development of
可
the
复制
oat
推广的产
cultivation
业模式，
industry. We
将
putting in place
改良
replicable
修
business
复这个
models
土壤，新增大量的耕地良田，改善生态环
reform
境，
and restore
保障
land,
食品安全，
increase
破解农业发
arable
展难
land,
题，具有
improve
非
ecological
常重
environment,
要的这么一
and
个现实意义。
ensure food
接
safety.
下来呢，我想跟大家
So this is of
这个一
great
起来探讨第二个问题
pragmatic
健康农业。
significance. Second, I would like to
健康农业
discuss with
是
you
要
the
实现
topic
农
of
业自身
healthy
的可持续发
agriculture.
展和
Healthy
绿色发展，
agriculture means the achievement
要
of
求我们要
sustainable and
尊
green
重
development
农
in
作
the
物生长的
agricultural
自然规
sector.
律，
It
以科技、
requires us
信
to
息和生
respect
物技术
the
来促进
law of
农业自
nature
身
and the
的
law
良
of
性
the
协
growth
调
of
发展。
agricultural products
这
by
个以
relying on
前
science,
高耕
information,
火
and
种
biological
粗放
technology to
原始
promote
的自然农
the
业不同，
benign and
它更
the
多的是采用生
coordinated
物技术、
development of the
循环理
agricultural
念、
sector. It is
互联网
different
技
from
术、
the
大
extensive
数据
and
等
the
来发展
primitive
现代生态农业。
means of agriculture in the past. It relies on biological technology and recycling concept to realize modern development of the industry. It also relies on intelligent agriculture and precision agriculture to enhance productivity. For instance, we pay great attention to the development of seeding industry. We have put in place the Seed Research Institute and Seed Resource Integration Platform. We introduced a lot of high quality talent from overseas, and we also introduced a lot of good high quality breeds. We step up research and development into vegetable, oat, and potato products. And we have created a World Agricultural Science and Culture Park in Nanjing. We use indirect interplant method to conduct pest control. We avoid using pesticide and fertilizer. And we use organic fertilizer and biological fertilizer to reduce the negative impact of chemicals on the environment, with a view to achieving healthy and sustainable development in the industrial park. Thirdly, safe agriculture. That is to ensure the safety of agricultural products. This is the primary social responsibility of agribusiness. In the development of agriculture and industrial sector, we focus on the organization and the integration of the agricultural value industry chain with food safety as the core, and we focus on the restoration of soil, operation of seed, and production, cultivation, channel integration, global sourcing, and financial services. We aim to provide the public with healthy and safe products.
On the production end, we have established a quality system with a comprehensive set of indicators, and the quality standard that we have adopted are for agricultural products provided to Hong Kong SAR and Macau SAR. For a long time, vegetables and meat supply for Hong Kong and Macau SAR mainly come from mainland China, and the Chinese government has attached great importance to the food and agricultural products supplied to Hong Kong and Macau. The products that are provided to these two special administrative regions have to pass the inspection of the authorities, and they have to have the right procedure as well as registration systems. The AXIC of China has made sure that there is a full traceability system established for our company in Ningxia, Nanjing, as well as many vegetable production sites that have passed the inspection of the Fishery and Agricultural Bureau of the Hong Kong SAR, and we have established a comprehensive cold chain for the storage and transportation of these food and agricultural products. We have also adopted the latest cold chain technologies to reduce food losses in the storage, transportation, and distribution processes, so that we have high quality products and very high market competitiveness. In terms of channels, we have two major assets that are cold chain logistics and agricultural wholesale markets. In fact, in China, the trade in the agricultural product mainly are done in wholesale markets. Actually, over 70% of them are conducted every year through wholesale markets with transaction value over 4 trillion RMB. However, the problem is this industry is still lagging behind in terms of infrastructure and the use of latest technologies. That is why we have established a new business model that would feature the latest internet finance technologies. And in this system, through integration, we could build number of very large-scale wholesale markets so that they could be standardized, and information system as well as latest financial technologies can be built into these markets. We would use big data to support the transaction of agricultural products, and we have a third-party real name payment card system to make sure that we can establish a traceability system to guarantee food safety. Currently, this smart system has been applied in large number of wholesale markets. An example would be the biggest market in Zhenglin, Henan, with an annual transaction of 85 billion. It has been using our system for a while, which has been very successful. Smaller markets in Shandong and Sichuan are also using our system. Of course, our biggest target is to use channels such as wholesale markets as well as cold chain, logistic exchange trade centers, and based on the big data that we have in the system, we would establish a platform that connects online with offline. Currently, we have high-quality agricultural products such as vegetable oil from Inner Mongolia in China, oat in Baichen, different beans, as well as garlics from Xinjiang, apples in Poland, as well as wine from France. Ladies and gentlemen, food is the first necessity of people, and agricultural products, while pursuing economic interest, sure, make their responsibility to promote harmony, health, and safety. In fact, a book that was written in the Qing Dynasty meant that agriculture or harvest are done by people, and the crop would have to rely on arable land, while we need to rely on heaven to give us a good harvest. This, in fact, vividly shows that we have to promote harmonious development between land, people, and the planet. In the end, I would like to say that Dasheng would contribute our shares to promote agricultural system development, food security, and healthy agriculture. Thank you.
Our next speaker, I want to thank you, Mr. Lan, for that presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Carl Prey, Distinguished Professor, School for Environmental and Biological Sciences, Rutgers University.
Excuse me. Okay, thanks very much for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure to be here. I'm not somebody that's been very closely associated with the Schiller Institute, so it's been educational for me meeting people in the Schiller Institute, and also I've really enjoyed these two presentations that have taken place. I hope I have a PowerPoint that you have ready to show. I have to say my PowerPoints are not as smooth and well presented as the first two speakers. These are primitive academic PowerPoints, unfortunately. While that's being put together, I want to say that I got started working on Chinese agriculture in 1994, working with Dr. Huang Jikun at the China National Rice Research Institute. And what we were looking at then, and what I continue to look at in China is the development of new technology, both through government research institutes and through private sector institutes. And what I want to talk about today is the opportunities that have arisen for collaboration that some of us may not be aware of in the US, and also talk a little bit about two examples of the interaction of scientists and technology in developing agriculture, both in the United States and in China. Excuse me. To start with, one of the things that many people may find surprising, and I may be able to show you in a few minutes, hopefully, is that China now, in real dollars, spends more money on agricultural research than any country in the world. China in 2011, when these calculations were made, was spending more than the United States. The United States was in second place, Japan in third, and then I believe India and Brazil. So that these investments that the Chinese government has made, or groups of Chinese government, central government, as well as the provincial and other governments, mean that China now is on the cutting edge of research in a whole series of areas. And what I'm going to talk about is the area of biological sciences just a little bit, and give you a flavor of the, I guess you could say, the prowess of Chinese agriculture and agricultural research, which then means that there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration between US scientists and Chinese scientists. Many are already going on, but I think we can build more in the future. And also that more of these can be focused on the developing world as well. Okay. As I've been rambling here, I think that the world needs more collaboration between US and Chinese scientists. And this can be a way to meet the goals of Chinese agriculture as well as US agriculture. We've already heard from the first two presentations the emphasis that the Chinese government and Chinese companies are now putting on sustainability, and they've got goals. The Chinese government has goals of capping the amount of chemical fertilizer and pesticides that are used in China by 2020. This is going to require more emphasis on biological research and more emphasis on, in this case, mechanical research also. And I think that there are many of the technologies and developments that have been taking place in the United States that can be transferable and useful there. And likewise, US farmers are trying to reach these same goals. It's not been expressed by the US government, but it's clear that American farmers also are trying to reach sustainability goals, partially defined in terms of ways to reduce the amount of chemical inputs, as well as other expensive inputs, but also to meet goals of sustainability for their land and for the future of American agriculture. So I think American farmers and Chinese farmers have a lot in common, and the goals of the Chinese and American governments have a lot in common also. Likewise, I think there's the opportunity to produce, how should I say it, to build on the Belt and Road Initiative, to build a scientific capacity on top of that. That was already mentioned by Dr. Ho, and that this could be of great importance to African agriculture as well as South Asian agriculture, where most of the hungry and poor live. This just are some numbers on the point that I made already, that China now, let's see if this works. Never mind. China, as you can see in the second column, now spends more money on agriculture research than the US does. And the growth has been phenomenal. Growth in India and Brazil have been huge also, but not nearly as much as in China. Now, not only the government has been investing, but more and more private sector investment has come into China. The last real study that was done about 10 years ago, so I don't really know the details now, but with initiatives such as the one that Dasheng Agriculture just talked about, you can see that companies like theirs are investing more and more in agricultural technology. And so it's not just the government that's investing, but also the private sector. And just to give two examples of the way Chinese and American agriculture have been intertwined and agricultural technology have been intertwined, as I'm sure the Chinese in the audience know, and perhaps many of you from America know, that the first development of hybrid rice in the world took place in China by Dr. Yuan Longping, and this got started about in the 1960s, and now is approximately 55% of all rice in China, which has meant a huge increase in the productivity of rice and the total production of rice in China. But it hasn't just affected China, because starting in about 2000, this same technology was moved over to the United States. In fact, Dr. Yuan has the patent on hybrid rice in the United States and has built a company based on that called RiceTech now. So it's about half of the rice in the US is hybrid rice. India has about 7%. Southeast Asia and South America also have some, and it's now going on to Africa. The story in this just is a slide I cut from the web about the number of people, number of organizations that are investing in hybrid rice globally. That includes both spinoff from Yuan Longping's organization in Hunan, as well as other Chinese companies and American and European companies now also. In hybrid corn, this has been one of the premier achievements of American technology historically. Got started in the 1930s in the United States, spread to Europe, South America, East Africa, South Africa in the around 1990, and then was adopted in China in the late 1950s, and now is about basically 100% of all the rice, all the maize, corn in China is hybrids, not American hybrids per se, but hybrids that have been developed with Chinese technology based on the ideas that were developed in the US. And now it's spread to Africa, Southeast Asia, and India, and is growing rapidly in those places. So there has been historically this interaction of US and Chinese technology that both countries have benefited from, and now the poor countries of the world also are developing from. Now, I'd like to argue that this investment in China that has grown to be more than in the US is not simply investing in low-level research to adapt technologies from elsewhere in the world, but is really now leading in many areas of science. So this is just one snapshot of the publications in the area of biotechnology in the top 10 journals in the world. And you can see that, well, the United States still has a comfortable lead there. China is by far the second biggest country and is rapidly catching up. And in some of the most advanced technologies, such as, let's see, what did I miss here? Sorry. Some other examples of China's leading technologies are the Beijing Genetics Institute, which is now one of the biggest genetics institutes in the world, and sequences human and plant and animal genomes all over the world. They've got offices in Seattle and in California and elsewhere. And then the second area is this new gene editing technology that is headed up by this CRISPR-Cas tech. And just a couple of examples, again, of the catch-up of China and perhaps leapfrogging soon. You look at the growth of patents in the CRISPR area, and you can see that, well, the U.S. Is still the leader. The red is it isn't very red, but the second biggest holder of CRISPR technology patents is is China, and it dwarfs most of the other countries in the world. So we've got two of the leading countries in biology and biotechnology, and it seems to me that this is a great opportunity for some kind of, I don't know what we want to call it, scientific Silk Road or scientific Belt and Road program that can build together on these basic technologies to produce, or basic science to produce the next generation of technologies for the world. This is just one other patent thing. This is pretty hard to see, but these are the leading institutes globally in terms of CRISPR patents, and the yellow is our Chinese institutes, and among those, it's mostly agricultural institutes. So I suggest that probably there are more CRISPR patents on agricultural technology in China than there are medical applications, which are the ones we think of in the US primarily. Oh, no, I knew. I keep hopping over slides. I apologize for that. How can we improve this? And I think this is one thing that we need to think a bit more about. The amount of collaboration in the biological sciences and in the social sciences has grown phenomenally between China and the United States. I mean, in the social sciences, I wouldn't be a distinguished professor talking to you right now if it hadn't been for this long-term collaboration with Dr. Huangji Kun and the Center for Chinese Agricultural Policy located in Beijing at Peking University now, and we've built this collaboration since 1994, as I mentioned, and this continual annual collaboration has built up into something that I think has really achieved some significance in terms of our knowledge of how Chinese agriculture works and how we can develop Chinese technology more rapidly, perhaps. The same kind of thing is going on in the biological sciences, but it's bumped into some roadblocks recently that have kind of decreased the confidence of American scientists in collaborating with Chinese scientists, issues about intellectual property rights and publications and things that have concerned American scientists. And I think that those are some of the things that we need to figure out how to overcome. I've suggested a list of things in the science area, including this intellectual property rights sort of issue, but also we both have this issue and problem in that our countries don't really believe in scientists very much anymore, and are concerned about the safety of our food. They're concerned about biotechnology. People don't believe in climate change, and so we both have this big problem of how do we better educate people about the importance of science and the continued importance of new technology. And then both of us need to be investing more in China. In public sector research. Of course, this is self-serving to a certain degree because I work at a state university and we'd like to have more money. But also it is clearly a problem in the United States. And we could take lessons from the Chinese, who have been much more prolific in their funding of agricultural research. Finally, in the area of technology, which is where the technology is, technology is developed that actually benefits farmers, I think there are a number of things that can be done to improve the trust and collaboration between US and Chinese companies. And I can go into those in the question period if somebody wants to, but my 15 minutes are up. And so I'd just like to thank you again for your attention. And oops, it's gone already, so never mind. Okay, thanks very much. I've opened the questions.
I'd like to now ask for Mr. Zhenglin to come to the stage. He is the Agricultural Attache of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in the United States. Would you please welcome him?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. 女士们、先生们，大家好。
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great pleasure to be invited to the Sino-US Agricultural Cooperation Symposium. I was very lucky to be invited to the symposium on the Belt and Road Initiative and Sustainable Agricultural Development yesterday. And I was really inspired by the presentations and the ideas and thoughts of a lot of great speakers. I believe our symposium today on the food for peace and thought is a very good extension of yesterday's event. And it can be the upgraded version of yesterday's symposium. Food for people and thought, that's a very good theme. And the Chinese translation for this is also very vivid and relevant. People rely on food to live. Without food, there is no thought. Food does not come in the air. It has to be produced by dedicated production and efforts. Only by hard work can we produce rich and healthy food. So without thought, we don't have food guarantee. Talking about food for peace and thought, there is another sentence that's closely connected with it. That is, food safety is the primary goal. I believe these two words can effectively reflect the pursuit of farmers and people in the agricultural sector. We are in the agricultural sector because we want to feed our people. We want to make sure that our people can eat well and eat safe food. China and the US are the two biggest agricultural nations. Of course, the US is the largest developed agricultural country, and China is the biggest developing agricultural nation. Agriculture is of great significance to both nations. Agriculture is a very important area of the development of Sino-US relations and the deepening of cooperation between the two countries. For a long time, the cooperation in the agricultural sector between the two countries has enjoyed good momentum. In particular, in the past few years, thanks to joint efforts, we have a very smooth operation of cooperation mechanism, effective exchanges of science and technological development in this area, steady development of trade in agricultural products, and a growing investment in the agricultural sector. In a meeting between the two heads of state in Mar-a-Lago in April of this year, the two countries reached a lot of consensus, including the establishment of 4 dialogue mechanisms, including the CED, the Comprehensive Economic Dialogue Mechanism, in which China proposed the 100-day program. It is the early harvest program that is affirmed and actively supported by the US side. agriculture is among the top priorities in this program. A few days ago, Sonny Perdue, Secretary of Agriculture of the United States, led a delegation of businesses, associations, farmers, and media to Beijing and Shanghai. And they held two grand celebrations and press conferences on the return of the U.S. beef products to the Chinese market. Agriculture is one of the areas of earliest cooperation between China and the United States. Back in 1972, before the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries, cooperation between the two countries in the agriculture sector started. Continental Grain Corporation of the U.S. set up the first JV in Shenzhen of Shanghai. And the headquarters of Dasheng is also in Shenzhen. So I believe these two are a very good coincidence. Agricultural cooperation is also one of the areas with the most effective cooperation between the two countries, be it in trade and investment, technological exchanges, and talent development. We have achieved great results. In the past 15 years, trade in agricultural products had witnessed an annual growth rate of 17%. Reaching $32.1 billion US. Of course, our figures are different from those in the US, but the trend is the same. Currently, China is the second largest exporting market for the US agricultural products, accounting for 20% of the US exports. A quarter of the soybeans produced in the US and two-fifths of the cotton produced in the US are sold to China. On average, every farmer in the U.S. exports 12,000 RMB yuan worth of agricultural products to China. U.S. is the third largest exporting market for Chinese agricultural products, accounting for 10% of the total. U.S. is also the largest source of imports for Chinese agricultural products. American companies are making tens of billions of investment in China, while Chinese companies are also investing more in the U.S. Agriculture is also one of the areas with the biggest potential of cooperation between the two countries. China is a country with huge population and few land. It is the largest producer of agricultural products, and it is also the biggest consumer and importer. The demand for quality agricultural products in China is tremendous. The U.S. has very large pieces of land and very few people. It is the strongest agricultural nation. It is the biggest agricultural exporter. This makes the two countries natural agricultural partners, and the cooperation and the space for cooperation is tremendous. Take beef as an example. Average annual consumption of beef per person is 5 kilo, which is only half of the world's average. If we get to the level of the world's average, China is going to increase beef consumption by 6.5 billion kilo every year, which is half of the amount of beef production in the US. So this demonstrates to us great business opportunities. Due to the differences in national conditions and agricultural conditions, it is inevitable to have disputes and conflicts in agricultural exchanges and cooperation. US is a commercial agriculture, the objective being making money and expanding into international market. Half of its commodities produced by the US are exported. It relies on consumption in other countries. However, in China, we have never talked about limiting the capacity of U.S. manufacturers. While the U.S. is constantly asking China to limit our capacity, production capacity. China's agriculture is food safety and upgraded small household agriculture. Food is strategic resources, and the government has to give top priority to food safety. Just like Mr. May stated yesterday, we have to feed 1.3 billion Chinese people. This means we have to take responsibility for the Chinese people, but also this is a great responsibility we need to take for the international community. Once there are problems in Chinese agriculture and the food supply, even if all the traded food in the world is sold to China, there's still a gap, and the consequences going to be catastrophic. That's why we always refer to food as heaven. For long, the Chinese government has always attached great importance to agricultural development and food safety, and give top priority to feeding 1.3 billion Chinese people. We focus on domestic production. We guarantee production capacity, and we have moderate imports with science and technology as underpinning. This is our national food security strategy. In 2015, China's food production stood at 620 million ton, which was the 12th consecutive year of growth. We also pay great attention to food safety regulation. We regulate the market in accordance with law, and we focus on institutions, laws and regulations. Thanks to long and unremitting efforts, the quality of agricultural products constantly increase. The qualification rate of agricultural products as a result of the sample examination reached 97.1%. This has provided important guarantee and support for China's economic and social development. It has also made positive contributions to food safety in the world. Talking about cooperation between the two countries in the agricultural sector, I have some thoughts to share. I believe the two countries have to have mutual understanding, mutual respect, mutual accommodation, jointly carry out innovation, and make the pie bigger. I would like to talk about innovation, which is a very hot topic recently. First, we need to have innovation in mechanism. There are a lot of mechanisms of agricultural cooperation between the two countries. As we all know, we have SNED, strategic and economic dialogue between the two countries. We have JCCT, Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade. We have JCCA, that is the cooperation mechanism between the Ministry of Agriculture of China and the Secretary of Agriculture in the U.S. and the Department of Agriculture in the U.S. Starting from this year, we put in place a new mechanism, that is CED, Comprehensive Economic Dialogue Mechanism. We not only upgraded the level of cooperation, we have more enriched content of cooperation, and the effectiveness and efficiency of cooperation is going to further increase. Second, I would like to talk about innovation in concept and mentality. Economic and trade relationship between China and the U.S. is only part of the bilateral relationship. Economic and trade relationship is interrelated and inseparable with other relationship. It is closely connected with science and technological exchanges, industrial policy, and the managerial experience sharing. They are both mutually reinforcing. China is promoting supply side reform of the agricultural sector. There are a lot of areas that China and the US can learn from each other. I believe if we have good results from science and technological exchanges, and we have good cooperation, the US products will have good opportunities to enter the Chinese market. The US products and the US standards can be promoted and developed in the Chinese market. This can provide guarantee for the sales of US products in China. But I was really shocked to see that the people responsible for bilateral exchanges in the Department of Agriculture in the US are quite conservative and even backward in terms of their thinking. They just host the technological exchange groups like hosting tourist groups. And I believe that in this area, we both need to make more efforts. Another area concerns Chinese investment in the US. I believe CFIUS approval in the name of national security and the restrictions of visa is not transparent or fair. This has become a major obstacle to Chinese investment in the US. In the meantime, our US friends are criticizing Chinese policies being not scientific and intransparent. I would like to state that double standards is detrimental to bilateral cooperation. Of course, I said just now that we do have divisions and differences, but we also have good space of cooperation. We have to manage our divisions and differences, and we have to create favorable environment. We cannot enlarge or make, we cannot enlarge our divisions and differences and our conflicts. When American companies are investing in China, we do not force you to do technological transfer, and we will make every effort to protect the IP of these companies. Recently, some US governors visited China to attract Chinese investment. They hope Chinese companies can invest in US agriculture. China supports and encourages these efforts. We can also explore the establishment of agricultural investment park in the US. We can also talk about cooperation in beef and the lamb products and the production and processing of soybeans. We can combine our own advantages and carry out cooperation in these areas. Lastly, I would like to say that we need to have innovation in our mentality based on statistics. In the trade between the two countries, US has trade deficit in trading goods, and its deficit against China accounts for over half of its total deficit. As you know, the US enjoys trade surplus in trading services towards China. We have never asked the US to stop exporting its products, those agricultural products, due to its big deficit.
Unfortunately, there are people who believe that the imbalance in trade has China to blame. And some people even start to question globalization. And they've been thinking about adopting policies to restrict China's export to the US. We have experts and scholars present today. You must have a more intelligent perspective on these areas. There are two ways to deal with the imbalance. The first would be restrict import, the other would be to expand export. I would like to say that the latter, the expansion of export, of course, would be much better than the restriction of import from China. We welcome high-quality agricultural and food products from the United States to enter the Chinese market. For example, pork and beef from the US have been popular in the Chinese market, and we're happy to see that the Chinese consumers like these products. At the same time, I hope that Chinese consumers will be able to enjoy agricultural products from China. At the same time, we hope that the US should make efforts to facilitate China's export of livestock, poultry, and aqua products to the US market. So we shall deal with each other's concerns. In our collaboration, I would like to also add that the Chinese government has its position on the management of genetically modified products. We have a prudently open position, and we are not looking at this from the perspective of trade protectionism, because we are responsible for ensuring the health and safety of our consumers. In fact, the genetically modified soybeans we import from the US account for 50% of all US export. In the process, we shall respect each other and follow each other's rules and regulations to find a solution that features win-win. Now, on the issue of agricultural subsidy, the US has launched a number of cases under the WTO framework against China in terms of agricultural subsidies, but the US should adopt an objective view and refrain from using trade remedy measures so as not to politicize economic issues or make matters worse. We should respect each other, and I believe that based on mutual respect and meet each other halfway, we're going to solve any problem that we might have, and we'll have more satisfactory cooperation. Practice has shown that in the long time, that in the past that we have seen collaboration between China and the US in agriculture and food sector. Companies and people in both countries have benefited greatly, especially companies and farmers in the US have benefited greatly. In the future, we have great potential in agricultural collaboration, and every step forward is based on collective effort and wisdom. I hope that we will continue to promote collaboration between the US and China in agriculture. The two performers this morning were very inspiring and exciting. One of them used a traditional Chinese instrument, the other used a traditional Western instrument. And together, they created fantastic pieces. I believe that similar to the dual collaboration between China and US is going to have the same effect. I would like to thank the Schiller Institute and as well as Dasheng and China Energy Fund Committee for their great support to this event. Thank you.
All right. I want to emphasize to everybody that there will be every opportunity in the questions and answers, which we're going to be getting to within the next 15 minutes. I am assured by the next speaker, who is Robert Baker, founding member of the Schiller Institute, farmer from Iowa, and a good friend of mine.
Thank you, everybody. So I want to start out by part of what I want to emphasize is Lyndon LaRouche years ago, decades ago, emphasized the idea of economic development. And he and his wife for all those years have worked around the world to bring people together with a harmony of interests around the idea that you don't want to separate economic policy and culture. We want to have beauty come together around all these elements with the idea of economic development. And one of the things that really spurred Mr. LaRouche on was when this gentleman that Dr. Ho mentioned came out with the book Limits to Growth. And Lyndon LaRouche, he countered it with a book called No Limits to Growth. And he said, the only limits we have are limits of developing the minds of the citizens of the nations of the world so that they could actually develop science and a cultural development. So Lyndon LaRouche emphasized a certain concept he called energy flux density, the idea of bringing huge amounts of energy into smaller and smaller concentrations, like the difference between a pile of wood that you'd burn and need truckloads of it versus a little pellet of uranium that we could use to nuclear power and even go into fusion. And with that concept, he has took this message to the world, and this is what I want to emphasize a process by using the development of agricultural machinery. So I want to start by discussing tillage. I'll discuss three things: soil tillage, planting, and harvesting. And what we see is in former times, we would till the soil with handheld instruments like these folks are. And I want you to think about and watch the soil as I go through these. Think about this soil. It's a living organ. I mean, it's full of life. The technologies developed into the moldboard plow, and we started using horses and animals to pull it. Further development with the production of steel and advanced that process. Then we had tractors, some very primitive looking tractors at this time, but back in that day, that was state of the art. Those developed, here's a steam engine, very powerful, very slow. This is a more modern rubber-tired tractor with a one-bottom plow. That's called a plow. And by the way, that curve on that plow is a cycloid curve, which many of us have studied. The implements grew larger, so you had modern tractors in the 60s and 50s that pulled four-bottom or more. And today we have huge machinery capability. This is a tractor with 700-800 horsepower pulling, you know, something like a 21-bottom plow through the field, and it goes very fast. Now, this technology can be applied at a large scale as well as a small scale. The second area I want to go through is planting seeds. Very important, because in these little seeds, you have a lot of genetic characteristics that are being microanalyzed and developed in a very rapid way. In primitive times, people would stab a stick in the ground, drop a hole in it or corn in it and step on it, and that's the way they planted. Notice the soil. You know, notice how rugged this is. Further developments, this is a planter with a box on the side, put the kernels in it, you squeeze it shut, you jab it in the dirt, squeeze it shut, and the little kernel comes out of that little wooden thing in the middle. Here's people planting their corn in former days. You notice the gentleman on the left has two. He's trying to get more advanced. And here we have an animal-drawn, more mechanical seeder, and that now has developed. And notice the soil. You know, then they could ride it. Today we have, here's a modern corn planter. And notice the soil. Notice the incorporation of the vegetative matter. And these can go 5 or 6 miles an hour. This is a 32 row corn planter. This is the gentleman sitting in a modern tractor cab tillage. So here's another planter, and notice this planter. You may notice a difference if you look at certain things on each end of it versus this planter. This planter has those things extend out. They're called markers. They mark the row when the planter turns around. And today there's no markers because they're run by GPS, modern technology. This is a particular mechanical device on most modern corn planters today that allows the planter to very precisely put the corn in at a certain depth, which today can be micromanaged per row as you go through the field, and I'll show that later. So this particular unit, they call it a max emerge unit. It was developed by the John Deere company. They have a capability of, instead of going through all that soil you've been watching, they plant directly into the corn stalks, no till. The corn stalks stay on top, help prevent erosion. By the end of by the time that corn is harvested, all those stalks will disappear because of all the organic matter that is decomposing, and fishworms come up out of the soil, gobble them up at night, take them back into the soil, and start a natural process of incorporating that matter. This is wheat. The wheat was harvested in the spring. The farmers went in and no-tilled the crop right into the wheat, and get just an excellent crop coming out of it. Now let's look at corn harvesting. Energy flux density. Think about the concentration of power per acre, per hectare. This is one of the original corn pickers. This is what it's called. It's called a pick. You put it on your hand, you jab it into the corn ear and break it off. And this is what farmers did. They walked by hand, broke the corn off, threw it in a wagon that was pulled by horses, And many of the old timers got really good at this, but they could pick maybe one wagon a day. This guy, a young guy, was really happy. He got one wagon load of corn he picked all day, and here he is in his retirement years, riding on the back of the wagon with a more modern device picking his corn, and here's two tractors picking corn in that wagon that he used to do by hand. More mechanical development. You got hydraulics under the wagon lifting it up so it rolls in the conveyor belt, goes up into the corn crib, and more advances in the harvesting machinery. And today, here's a 12-row corn head on a self-propelled combine, which many people have seen. Very powerful, you know, storage, hoppers holding 300 plus bushel per acre. Modern grain bins with sensors inside to maintain the temperature. They got aeration floors under them to blow air through the grain, up through to keep the grain all in good condition, and mechanically put it in, mechanically put it out. And today, with the all these modern machines, you can harvest at a very rapid speed. And so let's compare these. Here we have energy flux density, labor-intensive hand tools in three ways. We jump from that into this level. This combine head here is a 32-row head, and that corn planter number 2, they demonstrated one in Iowa this spring that's got most advanced precision, so it can go faster. Instead of going 5 to 6 miles an hour, it can go 11 or 12 miles an hour through the field. And they planted 1,000 acres in one day, which is about 2,500 hectares. And so you see, with that kind of technology, you can actually really increase the speed and precision because each row is monitored scientifically and computerized. So you see the comparison, and this is the idea of energy flux density that Mr. LaRouche has talked about. So we say beef up America. We set up a space program. You know, it's been shut down to a large extent. We need to go back because this spin-off technology came into it. Now we'll put on our jet packs and we'll see what this does with modern agriculture. So here's Curiosity landing on Mars. They brought it down. It's just phenomenal, beautiful process. And we did that with from China on the moon recently. I call this the astronaut farmer. So he's actually, you know, looking into the future. So here's Curiosity. These represent different areas. They got cameras, very high-tech cameras, so they can look things over. This is 3 different sizes or 4 that was developed over the years, various places they've been landing on Mars. And you see all the things that came out of it: robotic arms, lasers, color cameras, you know, mineral detection, drills, etc. Well, solar panels and different types of energy systems and different sizes. This is what's setting in a lot of fields in the United States and America. This is a Terrace designed with all that spin-off technology so it can go out by itself in a field and probe the soil and scientifically analyze the soil. So here's a gentleman that's you know, getting a probe of dirt. Here's a GPS on the rover that goes out in the field. So now you can start to manage your farm by the foot. You can actually see where different soil types are. And the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, has analyzed all these soil types throughout the United States. So you know the chemical makeup, you know how much clay, silt loam, sand, etc. So you can start now programming that into the computers that run those little buggies to go out and sample the various soil types. So this is a soil profile. You see clear at the bottom, you got one horizon, humus, you know, different layers of things that we need to look at. And, you know, we're getting more sophisticated now so that these types of things can be used, and much more is coming on board. So this is a soil probe of soil that will be sent to the university and get analyzed to determine how much fertilizer it needs. So these various fields now, instead of becoming one big field, they become small fields within one. So you can program your little rover on the farm to go and say how many soil types you want or samples and where do you want them. And now you can start to composite that information in a space age process where, you know, you can have some fun, you know, and you know, watch things out the cab, you know, check out the instruments and, you know, basically do like the astronauts do. Well, this is the modern tractor today. You see the computers in it, the farmer's sitting in there driving through the field. He's analyzing all kinds of data as he goes through. And again, notice the soil. And so he's programming, picking up data as he goes through. So now as his machines, his harvesters, tractors go through, they're picking up data as they go through the field. So this gets transferred back so that now, you know, the next generation of farmers coming on are going to be assimilating that machinery. Here's a tractor with, you know, the radar on the top, sensors, mass sensor, moisture sensor, GPS sensor on a harvester. And this picks up so you can analyze the yield as you go through the field, what the moisture is. So you put all these things together. So now you can use less maybe fertilizer, less herbicide, and you can pinpoint it where you need it as you go through the field, because now your fields start on the computers, starts taking on a different look. Instead of one big field, you see little micro areas, and you put that with the GPS and now the drone technology coming on. And now all of a sudden, as you go through the fields, you're picking up samples from all these different soil types. So we got layers of soil in the field. If you go to the bottom, there's 5 different layers. Now just think of these data grids that are being put on top of each other for a modern production agriculture to analyze in such a way that the little buggy on the left that took all the original probes of the soil, and the combine on the right, which is it went through the field, analyzed where the yields were large and small, so that now you're putting that data together so that the upper blue machine that's putting the fertilizer down, as it goes through the field, it has now been able to analyze different areas of each field that needs different amounts of fertilizer in different combinations. So as it goes through the field, it can mix this fertilizer and put on different quantities versus in previous time, you put everything on the field that was the same and you didn't change it. So the corn planters are the same way. They can go through the field and certain soil types are more productive. They can increase the number of seeds they plant there, and the soil types that are less productive, they can reduce the number of seeds. So they are more efficient with their seed technology. So when you put this all together, you see the little farm office on the bottom, and the guys, you know, in communication with all kinds of data that's coming in, and bringing that together in such a way that whether it's a large farm or a small farm, you can just start to manage it in such a way that now you're transforming the soil and the production into many different things. This is a cluster of robots that they're experimenting with, little guys that go out and they get even more technically diverse. You know, you check your cows, you know, see if they got a problem, and you know, take some pictures of the cornfield, see if there's a dry spot or weeds, you know, even spray. I know they're experimenting with this in China a lot, and all this technology is being discussed around the globe. But the idea is energy flux density. The idea of developing science, developing the creativity of the human mind, developing the culture that can assimilate that so that, you know, this becomes like a choral event where all these forces are coming together, and it's a very beautiful thing. So the communities get excited. That guy up in the right-hand corner That's a rover back in the early 70s that actually landed man on the moon, still driving around. So these combines are going to town. So we got a lot of planets around the Earth. And you know, with this technology, you start thinking about different things you can do. And you know, even though there's storms all over these planets, just like the climate's changing here, we could go back into space and start thinking about things so that this, which is the moon, someday may look like that. And that's it.
I would ask that the panelists join me up here for the questions period, which will begin now.
Thank you very much. It was very exciting. I think that from what we have heard this morning, it is very clear that we have no problems in feeding the world. So I'm thinking very particularly about the continent of Africa that has been under colonialism and imperialism for hundreds of years. Now there's change, but I think for me it's very clear that the collaboration between the United States and China regarding food production is essential and mandatory, and that, as we have heard, it's very compatible. So I would like to hear, I have a second thing I would like to say. I would like very much to hear from the panelists, from the speakers, concrete ideas immediately for how we could have, what initiatives that could be taken for collaboration for the development of the food production in Africa. Secondly, I have a proposal that this conference comes out with a resolution before we conclude today with a demand and that what this conference demand, namely that the governments of China and the United States should lead in implementing the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road, the agricultural Silk Road. We are, in all, as speakers have said, it is a human right to eat. And in order to think and to be creative, which is a very special thing that human beings are endowed with, namely capacity for thinking and solving all problems, there's absolutely no reason that every single child should go hungry to bed today. So I think that with the situation we have today, with the One Belt, One Road, which is on its way massively, that now we should immediately and very fast stamp out hunger. And I would like somebody to form a resolution coming out of this conference so that we think on a higher level to feed the world fast, and a collaboration between China and the United States leading the way for that purpose. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, anyone want to respond to that from the panel or not? Yes, no? We have a hand.
I guess I'll try to sort of take on the first part of your question. In terms of collaboration in Africa, I mean, there's, in order to meet these food security issues, there's not maybe as much coordination as there should be between China and the U.S., but there is some complementarity between what these two countries are doing. Excuse me. So that on the one hand, the problem of hunger is not so much food production, as we have already said, there's enough around, but the problem is poverty and the ability of the poor, who are mostly in the countryside, to get access to food or to have enough income to be able to buy food. And I think the complementarity complementarity between the U.S. and Chinese efforts so far in Africa is that the Chinese have concentrated a lot of their resources on improving the infrastructure of these countries, which is a huge problem in Africa, which as you know, you get railroads that go from the coast to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia or in Kenya and elsewhere, and you build up the road systems and the other kinds of infrastructure. This gives opportunities for farmers. And then if you can get the complementary technologies from the U.S. and China together, perhaps, you can allow those farmers to produce more on the same amount of small amount of land that they have right now. So that I think that there's a basic complementarity there, and the U.S. has been working very hard through the CGIAR, the International Agricultural Research Institutes, and elsewhere in which we collaborate with the Chinese to develop better agricultural technology and to use, and as my example gave you, the hybrid corn from the U.S. and hybrid rice from China to increase productivity. So I think that there is some complementarity there, although I don't know that there's been explicit discussions between the U.S. and China, and how to make that complementarity work better.
Okay, next question. Oh, do we have another response, or go ahead? Sorry.
我做点补充。正于刚才这个女士问的这个问题啊，
With respect to the question you raised, actually, I have mentioned it in my presentation. China is willing to work with third parties, including the United States, on technological and agricultural cooperation projects in Africa. In the past 2 decades or so, China has always been working on bilateral and multilateral mechanisms to contribute to food security in Africa. In the FAO conference held in Rome a few days ago, through South-South Cooperation Fund, China once again announced the contribution of $80 million to set up the South-South Cooperation Fund dedicated to agricultural cooperation with Africa. Secondly, in bilateral cooperation frameworks, in the past 4 decades, China has conducted a lot of technological cooperation projects with African countries, including technological exchanges, dispatch of personnel, joint development of farmlands, among others. Currently, we still have agricultural teams of 500 people in Africa developing these projects. We have developed over 1,000 talents for African countries in the area of farm management. Through these measures, we are effectively making our contributions to food security in Africa. Even if China was not rich back then, we had already initiated cooperation. Last but not least, we welcome future cooperation opportunities with America on African projects. Like the professor stated, Melinda Gates Foundation in the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences conducted the hybrid rice project in China that was aimed at protecting food security in all countries, including African countries. I look forward to more projects like these in future. Lastly, a famous professor yesterday, Professor Mei Fangquan, stated yesterday that the United States produces a lot of commodities, and its production capacity is double its consumption level in the US. If you can donate these products to African countries, I believe food security can be better protected and guaranteed in Africa. Thank you.
Sorry, I need to put my 2 cents worth of it. It's a very important topic. Okay, countries working together and to take care of the hunger problem and to supply food for everybody. But on what level are we cooperating? Are we just sharing food? Okay, we have some countries produce more, some countries cannot produce. If we just share food, I think it may be easier. Okay, but then again, it's a totally different problem. It's because if we treat the whole world as one country, there wouldn't be any problem, right? But unfortunately, the whole world is divided into 194 countries or even more. Some countries are big, some countries are small. And our resources, natural resources, were distributed unevenly, especially when we're discussing food. The most important natural resources is the amount of arable land. The amount of arable land, well, my data might be not absolutely correct, but it's amount to about less than 1/5 of all the lands are cultivatable. I think the actual number is about 14% of all the land are actually arable land. So when you divide that among the 100 around the world, some countries have more arable land than the others. You just go up to the wiki and you can see a table telling you which country has more arable land per capita than the others. In my presentation, I alluded to that. America, the average countries around the world has 0.2 hectare per person of arable land. And China has less than 0.1, actually 0.89 hectare per 0.089 hectare per person. In America is 0.49, almost 0.5, half a hectare per person. So some countries have more natural resources to produce foods than others. So if we all take out our antes, so all take our food together and pull them and divide them among the populations of the world, and there shouldn't be any problem. But do we want to do that? Can we just give our brothers a fish and then so that he can, he doesn't know how to fish and he can have a fish? Or shall we teach them how to fish? I think the second level of cooperation is not only sharing food, but sharing agricultural know-how, agricultural techniques, the farming systems, and all the farming technologies. Besides that, it's an investment in farming that's most important. Mr. Lyon has always alluded that modern farming is technology plus investment. Shall we share those? I think those are more pertinent in our discussion than just sharing food. Because sharing food can take care of the problem immediately, but in a very short future, in the long run, we need to share agricultural know-how. But what really guarantees that they would do that? Most importantly, is sharing values, sharing agrarian values that comes out of an agricultural society. Only when we share those values, they will have lasting peace coming from everybody being fed. So I think it's a long drawn up process and very complicated issues. I think we have to really decide what are our priorities. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Okay. We've been attending a number of these conferences over the past year or so, and each time my envy grows when I hear more and more about the accomplishments and intentions of the people of China and the things that you're accomplishing. Just yesterday, I read an account that the longest underground tunnel in the world has been completed in China, some below the sea, runs for some 4 miles, and the travel time between the 2 points now has been reduced from 3 hours to 30 minutes. And here in New York, it's the opposite for us. The travel time now is going from 30 minutes to 3 hours. So the envy grows, and we appreciate the impact that that type of infrastructure development would have on the movement of goods and services and the agricultural field. I wanted to reference what Mr. Zhenglin said when he talked about his response from the United States agricultural state or staff as to it having a lack of, seemed to me, vision or imagination. You're demonstrating throughout the world, most specifically in China. I heard very clearly what you had to say about, in Africa, about the work that's being done there, that commitment. So to Mr. Baker or any of the other United States farming representatives here, what is it that's lacking in the United States now to keep us from developing ourselves and then joining with ending hunger? FDR was very clear about his intention to do that, specifically for Africa at the end of World War II, but he died. So Africa has remained in this state. China has taken on the lead to develop it. What must the United States do now to get that attitude improved?
Well, one very important element that seems always to not be discussed in discussions of production of food is what typically is called the market. And the market is sort of an area that people assume is out there that you got to work with. But the aspect that is important to consider is, what does it take to develop the creativity of the citizens of the population in wherever they are, rural areas or in urban areas? But in terms of farming and agriculture, we have got to have a pricing structure in such a way that we can support more highly educated, science-oriented food producers, and they will implement the technology necessary to increase the production of food. And in previous times, the United States had a process back in the 40s and early 50s that was called a parity pricing mechanism, which actually was designed to increase the number of farmers in the United States and in such a way that they could have a dignified life, but assimilate lots of technology. And now you have very educated food producers assimilating all kinds of technology and producing tremendous yields with highly developed seeds and plants and fertility systems. But the end result is if they have a bumper crop, they lose money, and many of them go out of business. And you see, that's a system that's got to be changed. It's got to be changed in such a way that we have more farmers. I mean, we should have 1 million more farmers in the United States. We should have highly productive, small, they could be small, they could be large. But the key thing is so people don't get penalized for actually implementing high states of technology and doing what human beings should do to develop, the world and, space, and then assimilate that technology back in. Just an idea that we have to keep in mind. All nations.
Okay, very good. Okay, we'll take the next question.
Hello. I'm Ron Wazorik from South Dakota. South Dakota is the geographical center of North America, and we're almost totally dependent on agriculture in South Dakota. My family uses the technology that Bob Baker would just put on the screen up there, and I thought that was an excellent presentation. But my family has been, we're like 4 and 5 generations on the same farm and farming area, and in the past 3 years, my family has lost millions and millions of dollars on their farm operation. And I think the technology we have is fine and wonderful, but how do we keep these people in business in America? And if we don't address an economic policy and get an economic policy back based on parity pricing for the farmers and a Glass-Steagall that punishes speculation and usury, I think we've got a long ways to go. Another big problem is the distribution problem. We need that high-speed rail system that China has been working on going across the America here. I guess that's about all I have, but I'd like to have you address that.
Let me say the following. So just on this question, and then others may want to speak, because obviously, perhaps somebody from the Chinese delegation will like to speak to it, but I'll just say the purpose of this conference, which is occurring, of course, at the same time as the G20 summit, is that this discussion is embedded in a larger discussion, which the Schiller Institute and Helga Zepp-LaRouche in particular have not only encouraged, but insisted on. There is a problem. The United States policies are disastrous.
Why don't you call them?
They must be rectified, and they have to be rectified by citizens taking policies that are not disastrous and advocating those policies. And we would not presume to make it necessary for our Chinese guests to assert what I've just stated. They're demonstrating their view. Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, who designed something called the four economic laws, references, of course, Glass-Steagall, Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall. And I'm happy to say that tomorrow we'll be going up to Hyde Park, to the home of Franklin Roosevelt. We'll be visiting the Henry Wallace Center, the Agricaltural Center, he having been the Secretary of Agriculture for FDR. And this issue of human economics, as opposed to predatory monetarism, which is the practice of the United States, is what we want to see come out of the present administration. And clearly, the meeting that happened between President Xi and Donald Trump showed some possibilities. In recent days, we've had problems again. We have those because of, in our view, intervention by intelligence agencies. Let's just say what it is. British and American intelligence agencies, and a disorientation that we believe happens around the Trump administration. I wanted to say that so that since Helga isn't connected or isn't able to speak, I at least assert that, that it's clear or made clear to the people who've come here to this conference that we're very clear about what the purpose of the United States has to be, and the U.S. citizens, in terms of changing what the United States has been doing for far too long. It's been a genocidal policy in some respects. It has certainly not been cooperative. And we want to see that change, and we're happy that they are here, and we're happy to discuss this at any extent that we are permitted. So I'll just say that much. I also just want to point out, we have a limited amount of time for questions. I just ask people to be a bit brief on what you're saying, and just turn to the panel and see if anybody has anything to add or wants to say anything. Leave it alone? Okay, good. All right, yes, sir. Oh, okay.
Thank you. I've been standing here a while, so I just have to get my bearings. I am thrilled by the theme of this conference today: food for peace, food for people, food for thought. Can we enlarge our imagination? I grew up, my father was a farmer, but he was not naturally a farmer. He was more an engineer. So I come from engineering and agriculture. I know that what it's like to make a living in America for a farm is difficult. But do we have the imagination to consider the possibility of international commerce. The excitement of all of the soybeans that we are selling to China, the excitement of possibly having a beef market in China, the possibility of feeding the world. This is the 21st century. Speaking of the LaRouche energy flux density, could we not just apply that to the kernel of corn, which is a seed, and one seed going in one at a time, to planting and harvesting 48 rows of corn, planting seeds in the midst of the husks rather than digging up the dirt to plant the seed? Can we imagine? But also, let us think, the radio took us one place, TV took us another, the internet another place. We are in a different world, and we have to look at how we're seeing the world. We cannot see it the way we saw it when we were in college or when we got our master's degree or our doctorate. This, if we are going to survive, we have to find a way to cooperate, or we will die from some fool using a nuclear weapon. And now there are tinier nuclear weapons. So I love what Dr. Ho has to say. The two gentlemen that spoke in Chinese. I love the American agriculture professor from Rutgers. This is important work, but we have to we have to think more imaginatively. So how can we have food for thought to feed humanity? This is the 21st century.
Okay, I think they got the idea.
One comment I would reemphasize is the thing that is like the giant elephant sitting in the room, because we all know our countries across the world are assimilating technology. They want to implement it. So what holds it back? What holds it back is the marketplace. What is the marketplace? It's something that's controlling things in such a way so that citizens can't make a decent enough living so they can develop their minds and their creativity and their lifestyles in such a way. And this is what's the Schiller Institute and various organizations that work together, bringing these concepts of the idea of economic development like a chorus, but also developing the social ramifications of this, because economic policy has social ramifications. And what we're seeing is the devolution of society, because people cannot maintain the types of income streams they need to put modern technology into practice. And when they do, they have to go deep in debt, and then the prices, if they go down in farming and agriculture, we slowly see bigger and bigger consolidation, working on smaller and smaller margins, because the smaller guys can't make it. And that's destroying the social fabric of the rural communities. But in meeting after meeting, what you see is people say, why can't we, why can't we, why can't we? And the elephant in the room is, why can't we control the Wall Street policy that's set up, that is putting controls so that the people that produce the food and manufacture can't receive a price necessary? And this is where the policies like Mr. LaRouche and many other people have promoted around Glass-Steagall and the types of regulatory things that governments can put in place to maintain a dynamic in such a way that the citizens benefit, and not a bunch of international financial institutions that use the citizens to make their money with.
Okay, good. Next.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a professor from Columbia in civil engineering. So this architecture, agriculture is not my major, but I observed the development of the food production from using manpower, then animal, now all kind of advanced technologies. When you talk about the food security, I'm thinking now this kind of food production business become like more and more like oil-based for energy perspective. Yeah, because I'm working on the infrastructure and the energy. So now my question is, yeah, you talk about the food security, then the oil security, energy security also an important issue. What's your view, like your vision for the future, like the energy used in your like business? Yeah, you're talking about the harmony with the nature. We know the oil-based business maybe not good. So how do you transfer the business for the renewable energy or some other energy source? So that's my question. Yeah, I want to learn your vision.
Anyone from the panel? Or people?
Sure enough, you know, the farming industry uses a lot of energies. And the tractors that you've seen with high level of mechanizations and machineries being employed in the farm, they need energies to produce. And unfortunately, these machineries, they are tractors, farming trucks, and all these things, they all use gasolines or diesels, okay? So once when gasoline prices and diesel prices go off the roof, and that will be reflected in your food prices as well. And for example, in North Korea used to be a farming state. They produce a lot of food for all these people, also for Mongolia as well, because they have modern farming imported from Russia, and Russia also supply them with energy, with oil, and to run the tractors. But when the Soviet Union disintegrated, North Korea was left out dry hanging, and with no potash, no fertilizers, no pesticides, and also no oil, no diesel to run their tractors. And that's why it's one of the major reasons why they did not have enough food to eat in North Korea. But what they grew in North Korea now today are all organic, because they are not growing, you know, with pesticide and also other things. But this is one thing that we can apply, the solar energies and all these renewable energies to farming, but that would take a generation or so to replace all the farming tractors and all the farming instrumentations and mechanics with renewable energies, and that will take probably a few years to do that. But for the farming areas, China has done, as I mean, my presentation, has long taken care about the energy use in the farming villages by the biogas digester. You know, they're using the excrement of the people and also of animals, and they put them in a very, in a cookery, in a place they can store it, and they ferment it and liberate methane and also these gas will be siphoned into the family to provide heating for warmth, and also for cooking, and also for human usage. And they will take care of the energy needs in a farming rural village. And China has done that. And they are all, you know, pretty inexpensive, and also have very little small carbon footprint.
我这边我这边补充一下，就是我们的一个实践哈，就刚才我也介绍到了，我们在中国的江苏南京 city, we have a more than farm site of 32 square kilometers. In this site, while using energy, we do use quite a large sum of energy, but we have two methods. First, we would use
thermal to heat up the site. In winter, the weather in Nanjing is cold, so we would use thermal technologies to warm up the site. I would also use solar panels to have electricity to help with these projects. Thank you.
Double-barreled. I think we need to come to the defense of conventional farming in the U.S. I mean, those tractors are getting bigger and bigger, but the amount of energy that's used to to plow the fields and all this per unit of corn or per unit of whatever kind of agricultural output you're talking about has gone down, and has gone down steadily over the last, 30 years, 20 years? So we're, in the US, we're using a lot less energy. Those machines are bigger, but they're a hell of a lot more efficient, and then they're using the energy more efficiently also because they're doing things like no-till and low-till farming, which means you don't have to run across the field so many times. This is, I should say, I don't know if we have a lot of organic supporters here or not, but I should say, in contrast to organic agriculture, which is essentially replacing chemicals and fertilizers with more and more tractors and more energy. At least that's my opinion on it, and I know definitely they use more energy than conventional farmers do. So that I think that there's a misapprehension about really what's going on in terms of the amount of energy that's being used to produce the food that we produce these days, and that we have to look at this kind of efficiency, and whether it's in terms of the density theory of Dr. LaRouche or somebody else. I think we have to be a little more careful about the way we look at this, and look at it more in terms of efficiency.
I'll just say myself, if you want to respond, Bob, or go ahead, fine.
That's a very good point. And you see, this is, again, a thing I would emphasize is, you see, as more and more of these efficiencies come into play, they, based on what the producers should expect, they should expect to get some compensation back for implementing those new efficiencies. And we have a steady history of more and more technology gets put in place. We produce more efficiently, but the price is just a little bit below where it should be, so that we have fewer producers getting bigger. And that's a policy that, it'll go to a certain point, and we'll have something that's very detrimental.
My father raised 7 kids on half section of land. My brother farms 30,000 acres. In the last 2 years, he ain't making enough money to feed his kids.
Let me take up something here, because we're at time and we have a presentation that we have to make, but I also want to respond in terms of this discussion. Since unfortunately we weren't able to get Helga hooked up, I want to say something with respect to this specifically. It's not merely energy flux density. The idea is that technological progress, let's take the President of the United States. The one thing that is clear from the Trump administration is a commitment to space. The one thing that's very clear about Russia and China, also India, also Japan, is that they are space powers. Now, China is committed to the idea of mining helium-3 on the moon. It's an old program that the United States used to have at the time that we had the moonshot. Mining and agriculture are very related. Think about the idea of soil and soil composition. You don't have to just think about that on the Earth, think about it on the moon, think about it on Mars. Think about what a rover does when it investigates the soil. The issue, the conception is the human creativity that is applying itself to defy the problem that existed the moment before. Human creativity is applied to problems that are ostensibly insoluble because those problems themselves are the bedrock of a solution. Now, the conception in terms of our time and what we ought to be talking about is this being the 100th anniversary of the birth of JFK. What about a recommitment by the United States, a real one though, but in collaboration with Russia, in collaboration with China, like Kennedy discussed at the American University in June of 1963. Something that doesn't involve conflict, doesn't involve geopolitics, doesn't involve games with respect to trade and manipulations. Involves the idea of justice because it involves the idea of real creativity shared, not intellectual property rights in the way in which that's discussed today, but a mutual sharing of dynamic breakthroughs in science and technology applied to food, applied to health. I think this is what we are going to hear more about in the afternoon session. I'm going to have to call this one to a close now because we're getting way off time. We're actually still on time, but we have a press availability, and I believe we have a presentation. Is that correct, Diane? Do we have a presentation that we're supposed to make now, or? Yes, Mr. Lon had a presentation, I think. Diane, could you come up? This is being this is, as I understand it, a presentation on behalf of Dasheng Corporation to Schiller Institute, and accepting will be Diane Sayre for Schiller. Please come. Right in the front. Oh, and then take the microphone. Pick it up.
In a few minutes.
That's beautiful.
这是中国南京的一个这个银井。
This is a traditional silk from Nanjing, and this is the Chinese cultural heritage. The painting was made by Mr. Zhao Meng from Yuan Dynasty. In this painting, we can see two mountains. The two mountains are far apart, just like China and the United States. It is my conviction that although we are far apart, our cooperation and our exchanges are effective. We have very good cooperation, and I hope our cooperation in the agricultural sector can develop prosperously.
Thank you. Thank you. That is very appropriate, and it is very in keeping with the proposal made earlier for a resolution for the United States and China to collaborate in solving the food crisis in agriculture and globally. And I thank you very much on behalf of the Schiller Institute. It is a beautiful gift.
We're going to take a final question, and then we're going to adjourn. So could you, if you could do your question right there, and right there.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking you, Dennis, and the Schiller Institute for today's wonderful event, and thank you for all the panelists for being here and your presentations. A couple of questions real quick. I'll be as brief as possible. Very relevant to farming, of course, is air quality and soil quality. So I was just curious what kind of measures are in place in China in terms of the farming for undoing soil degradation due to chemicals in the air, and also getting rid of the flare gases that are still entering the atmosphere there. Are there technologies and stuff in place for that? Secondly, what platforms are there in place for the scientific exchange of knowledge that we've been talking about today, which is very important to seeing all of these things through? And then lastly, in terms of crop choice, I hear a lot of corn and I hear a lot of rice, but there is a crop that unfortunately I don't hear mentioned enough, and it really is the most badass plant on the planet, and that is industrial hemp.
let me just do this. I've been informed that we've got to go to our press availability right now. Here's what we'll do. We'll take that question at the top of the second question and answer period. Or you can also ask any of the speakers that are available right after, but we have press that are waiting upstairs, and a couple of the people here have to get there right away. So I apologize for that, just as the way it is, but you can get your answer into either individually, or we can take it up at the top of the next Q&A period, no problem. All right, so let people know that we are reconvening here. Let's make it 2:10. Let's make it exactly an hour from now, okay?